Going live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our next what we've had a series of discussions with candidates that are running for various positions, lieutenant governors, the Windsor County senator positions, I won't recall them all, but it's been a great conversation to have. And it's a role that the Windsor County Democrats are excited to play. On the screen, the YouTube screen, you'll see a link to our contribution icon, Act Blue, and feel free to contribute to the Windsor County Dem so we can continue to get the word out in a number of ways. We have two candidates tonight that are running for the U.S. Senate. Unfortunately, the third candidate, Representative Peter Welch, has scheduling conflicts. It's pretty busy down in Washington right now, as I understand, but he's not able to make the session tonight. But we have with us Niki Thran, and we have Isaac Evans-Frantz. So I'm going to let each of you have 2 minutes to just introduce yourselves, your background, where you live, what you do, and you could make an initial statement about what led you to decide to run for this position. So, Niki, I'm looking right at you on my screen, so why don't you start?
Thanks, Al. Thanks, Dottie. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be back with the Windsor Democrats. Before I begin, I'd like to make a quick statement. In Australia, they begin public meetings and gatherings with something called an acknowledgement of country. And my daughter lives there, and I was there recently and touched by this brand new tradition. And I was pleased to find that there are several American versions, and I'd like to start with one of mine. I would like to acknowledge the legacy of the Abenaki people of the Dawn. We are standing tonight on their ancestral homeland. As a sign of respect, we recognize and honor the Abenaki, their elders, past and present, and future generations. We are committed to addressing exclusions and erasures of all of those in the BIPOC community and to confront the ongoing injustices of the legacy of colonialism. Thank you for taking a minute with me to recognize the people who have been stewards of this land for centuries before us. My name is Dr. Niki Thran. I'm an ER doc, a previous member of the Windsor Democrats, and I am living currently in Warren. I am an ER doc, still working full time. And thank you so much for the invitation. It is great to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Isaac, introduction from you, please.
Sure. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for setting this up. Al and Dottie, thank you for your role. I think it's so important for democracy for Vermonters to be able to hear from the candidates. So thanks for helping make that happen. And thanks for everyone who's taking the time to watch and listen. My name is Isaac Evans-Frantz. I am from Brattleboro, and that's where I live today. I played a role in the creation of student seats on the Vermont State Board of Education when I was at Brattleboro Union High School. I brought students from around the state together to campaign for that. And Governor Howard Dean appointed me as the first student with a vote on that board. Since then, I've worked as an educator, and I've worked in community health centers, I've worked in schools, and my most recent job has been being the director of a national human rights and humanitarian advocacy organization. It was in that capacity that I had the opportunity to build national coalitions. One was called the Global COVID Response Coalition, and we brought together organizations representing tens of millions of Americans to get legislation passed through the United States Congress, and that resulted in policy change. It happened actually at the international level, where resources were released to the tune of $650 billion during the pandemic to help countries cope with the economic challenges before them. I also have built a national coalition to stop US participation in the war in Yemen. And we, because of the work that we did, especially in Vermont, but around the country, we now are going to see a vote in the United States House of Representatives on US participation in that war. I played an important role in the passage of legislation in the Vermont State Legislature to expand the dental workforce, to expand dental care to more Vermonters. I am running because I think that we need voices of everyday Vermonters, everyday Americans represented in Congress. I think that our US Senate is not reflective of the diversity of our country. If I am elected, I'd be the first openly gay male US Senator. I'm from a low-income background, and I'm well below the median age of the United States Senate. I think that it's important that we bring more voices into the fold, that more people have a voice there. I think for too often. All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And you'll have more opportunities to expand on that. So what we're going to do as best we can to stay on the 2-minute timer. Well, you both mentioned about the importance within a democracy, and it seems pretty clear that the GOP is planning to undermine the state election processes in a number of states, not in Vermont that we know of, and I'm pretty sure of that, but certainly that's a hammer of our time, and the installation of partisan elected officials and workers. This calls the very survival of democracy into question. What positions and steps would you take to end this risk for us as a democratic society? Small d. And actually, Isaac, we'll start with you. We'll kind of flip at each question. So we'll do you first, and then Niki, and then keep reversing it on each question.
So to start, I think it's really important that we maintain control of the United States Senate. I also think that it's important that we have leaders who are independent from the entrenched corporate interests in Washington. I see so many people in Vermont who've given up on the democratic process, and I mean with the lowercase d, who have said, what's the point of voting? And I think that we need to have leaders who are not part of that entrenched system, who bring new energy, fresh perspectives. That is one of the reasons why that I'm running for the United States Senate. I think we have to be honest about the challenges any Democratic nominee might have, and this is a really important time to be in the primary process to be honest about the differences between the different candidates. I have seen so often that the large special interests, the corporate lobbyists, have been so successful at getting their messages and their priorities through Congress. And I think that leaves a lot of people feeling left behind and like they don't really have a voice there. So that's part of the work that I've been doing, is bringing together it's farmers and nuns, pastors, people from across the country to pass legislation by bipartisan groups of people. And that is what I'm about, is bringing more people into the fold. And that's what's going to save democracy, is when more people have a seat at the table.
Okay, Niki?
I think campaign finance reform is the biggest way we're going to make change. Repeal of Citizens United and reinstatement of McCain-Feingold will be a really important first step. The other thing that is super important is getting people excited. Just like Isaac was saying, people have sort of given up. And I think having candidates like myself and Isaac that are out of the mainstream, that people can relate to, will help energize people and make them feel like they are part of the democratic process. Education of the issues is vital. I think if there's anything good that's going to come out of the Supreme Court decision attacking reproductive rights, and gun violence, the only two good things I can see is that it's going to get people riled up and out in November. There's a lot at stake in this next election, and a lot that I know I'm really ready to fight for. But I think the main thing we can do is get corporate money out of politics.
Well, since you bring that up, and since you're next, so stay right there. Our Democratic Party, large D, is strongly opposed to the Citizen United ruling. It's been in the platform, has been worked at, but without a clear Senate majority, that change seems difficult, and without even a Supreme Court that would back it up. How do we solve campaign finance reform, dark money, et cetera, other than having enough Democrats to avoid the filibuster?
Getting rid of the filibuster. That's how we're going to have to do it.
All right.
I understand the principle behind it, but we are not getting anything done in Washington. It's part of the reason I'm so angry, and a big part of the reason I'm running. So I definitely feel like repeal of the revoking the filibuster will be a key to getting things moving again in Washington.
Okay, and Isaac, you want to add to that?
I agree with Dr. Niki that we need to get rid of the filibuster. I also think that we need to be making sure whoever is in the role of the next junior US Senator can follow in the footsteps of Senator Bernie Sanders in being a movement leader, in organizing people, not just within the US Senate, but within the country, within the United States. You know, I look at Bernie and I see that he's standing on the picket lines with workers. I see him taking patients to Canada to get prescription meds. And he's not doing that just to help out those people individually, but he's doing that to help move the conversation forward. You know, I don't think we're not talking about Medicare for all until his presidential run. It's Vermonters who helped make that happen, to bring that into our consciousness, into the conversation, the possibility for having Medicare for all. So I think it's critical that we have elected leaders who are not taking corporate PAC money, to lead by example. Bernie has done that consistently. He's never taken corporate PAC money. And so if he can do it, then I think that any US Senate candidate in Vermont can do that. So I think that it's not, there's the short term and there are the challenges that we have. But if we build enough people power, and if we build that political consciousness in this country and we'll mobilize, like I've been doing for my work, we can actually change policies that look impossible to change. I've had that experience where I've said, you'll never pass a Yemen War Powers resolution. You'll never get support for that bill. And then we organized from congressional district to congressional district and moved legislation through a Republican-controlled Senate and got it to the president's desk. So we can do that again with campaign finance.
Okay. Let's start with you again. We've all seen how militarized police forces, I think by militarized, we're talking equipment and SWAT teams and things like that, have responded differently to Black Lives Matter protesters, for example, versus white power, if you will, insurrectionists on the streets. What steps would you work towards to change how our police respond to public protest? Defunding the police is considered by many, in retrospect, as a terrible slogan. What would you replace that with? Or do you think it's a great slogan?
I think that it's important that there's accountability for people in any part of our society. People who have, but particularly when people have guns, there needs to be accountability for them. And I support the investment in communities. So investment in social work, investment in schools, investment of taking care of people's taking care of one another, of us being able to really loving our neighbor, I think means that we invest in human beings and we invest in our communities. And policing I see as the result of where there are problems that we have not addressed earlier on, kind of far down the road when we get to policing. One thing that I think we need to do in particular is ending qualified immunity. What that means is that we need to have accountability for police officers, just like we would have accountability for people who are part of any other vocation. If police officers break the law, then they need to be held to account. That's one really concrete step that I'd like to see, is that ending qualified immunity. And as I mentioned, I think that a demilitarization of our police, an investment in social work is really important at this time.
All right. Niki?
So I agree with everything Isaac said. There are, one of the huge issues that I have in the emergency department is, and I want to start by saying that I work with law enforcement all the time in the ER. And the vast majority of the police I deal with are brave, they are honest, and they want to help the people that they serve. However, there are bad seeds. There are racist, misogynist police officers who I have seen beat people in their custody. And there is no way for me to report those police officers. There's no way, we are mandatory reporters for child abuse, domestic abuse, elder abuse, but there's no way for me, I wouldn't even know where to begin if I saw somebody who was hurt at the hands of law enforcement. So that has to change. The police unions are too strong. They cover up bad seeds instead of getting rid of them. So we need to have better accountability and a way to report those who are not protecting those they serve. It is really important that we work hand in hand with social work. Many of the people who are in the custody of law enforcement really have mental health issues, and those definitely need to be addressed as well.
Thank you. We've just seen in the last 48 hours or 72, it's hard to keep track with the quantity of news coming across, but there seems to have been some incremental success in terms of developing some gun safety legislation across a broad bipartisan effort in our Senate. Would you support the measure as discussed so far?
You want me to go first this time? Or?
Yeah, we're flipping the order. So
That's
if you
fine.
ended, then you start the next one.
Yeah, so I've worked a lot on firearm safety. I don't think it goes far enough, but I do understand that we have to make some compromises. To me, the answer is not more guns. And having been a physician for many years, we're not going to cure mental health. The problem is we have to go to the source, which is the gun manufacturers. They have to be held accountable. So I do support the outline of that they put forth, but no, I don't think it goes far enough.
Okay, but you'd vote for it if you had the opportunity at this point.
If it was that or nothing, absolutely.
All right, Isaac, same question.
Yes, I think it's critical that we take steps for gun control and gun safety in this country. Black people should be able to go out shopping. Children should be able to go to school. My friends lost loved ones in the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando 6 years ago. My LGBTQ plus friends should be able to go out at night. we need to make sure that people are safe in this country. So it's great to see that there's been some agreement, Republicans and Democrats, around mental health and telehealth investments and closing the so-called boyfriend loophole, enhancing the review process for buyers who are under 21, like we have in Vermont. We need to expand that sort of common sense gun control, those sorts of laws around the country. So yes, I do support this.
All right.
And I will say one other thing is I think that we need to build people power in this country to stand up to the gun manufacturers and their lobby. They have had so much influence, undue influence in Congress. And that's where we need more movement leaders, more people who are going to organize everyday Americans to stand up and saying enough.
Well, good. Then stay right there, because I want to go a little international for a couple of questions. One of the funders of the NRA, it would appear, has been Russia for quite a few years. Is kind of a ploy of theirs, if you will, a strategic ploy to help build the division within our country. And it leads to really election tampering. You could boil it down to that. Russia has been a significant player, but there's others as well, but particularly Russia. What 2 or 3 steps would you take to eliminate foreign electoral tampering?
That's something that I need to research more. I will say one thing is that foreign influence in our government, and particularly the influence of dictators, is something that I will stand up for. I have stood up against this in the past, and I will continue to do that. Saudi Arabia is the country that I'm most familiar with in terms of their influence in Washington. They have so many lobbyists compared to the number of people who are lobbying for the public interest, and so much access. I mean, I've heard from folks who work with different, with key members of key committees like the Senate Foreign Relations Committee or the House Foreign Affairs Committee, who say that they have so many meetings, their staff is taking so many meetings from Saudi lobbyists, and that affects US policy, that sort of access. So I'd like to see some real guardrails to protect our public from having this sort of lobbying influence. And that's after the election, right? That's outside of the election. That's a legal process, is that it's completely legal for foreign governments, dictatorships really, to have these lobbyists who are advocating for their policies, which include efforts that are starving people around the world, like in the country of Yemen. And that's something that has to stop. But specifically around your question around election tampering, that's something that I need to look into more. For one thing, I would like to make sure that that in this country, within people in this country, have access to the ballot box. And it breaks my heart that there are people and particularly Black people in the South in this country who have had polls shut down, who have had these laws installed to make it harder for them to vote. So there are things that we can do just to make it easier for people to vote in this country.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Niki, same question, or do I need to repeat that, or did you have a sense this is in terms of election tampering? And I was it could be others, but I certainly have been thinking of Russia specifically because it seems pretty clear that our last president was essentially an agent for Vladimir Putin. And so I don't think any of us want to see that happen again, but what would we do? What could we do? What would you recommend that we do to prevent that from happening?
Well, I think we have to support the federal agencies that made us aware of this tampering. The other thing is, like Isaac just said, if there are lobbyists, we can choose to meet with them or not. I haven't met with a pharmaceutical rep in decades, probably 20 years. And that's because I don't want them to influence me. And I think we can do the same thing in terms of foreign affairs. I agree very strongly with Isaac that countries like Saudi Arabia, I think Biden's planning a trip there now. That gives them legitimacy. As a woman, I am horrified by the way women are treated in Saudi Arabia. And I don't think we should support publicly me as an individual, as a senator, countries that are not, whose human rights are not those values that we have in the United States.
All right, so stay right there. Then our efforts to support Ukraine and our NATO alliance, that would meet your approval and support as well.
Yeah, I wish we could do more for Ukraine. We have talked about the fact that we're all worried that this will lead to a third world war. But I think we should do everything we can to stop this right now, because people are being murdered in Ukraine right now. And I would like to see us give them more arms. And you know, I'm not a big fan of military intervention. I see it only as a last resort when all diplomacy has failed. But I feel that at certain points, you have to show your strength, and this is one of them.
Great. All right, and same question to you, Isaac, specifically relative to us vis-a-vis Ukraine and our NATO alliance, and this whole exercise around Russian behavior.
The key thing here, well, first of all, my heart breaks when I see the images in the newspapers about what's been happening, what so many people have had to deal with. The families being just having their lives totally upended, and it gives me pride to see all the Vermonters who are standing up. I got to go to the rally in front of the State House in March and stand with Vermonters who are standing in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. One thing that I would like to see is for the United States to put as much energy into diplomacy and de-escalation as it has put into weapons transfers. We have to ask ourselves, how is this going to end? How are we going to protect civilian lives? And that's been the focus of my work the last few years with this National Humanitarian Organization, Action Corps, is that we've been advocating for the people of Yemen who've been bombarded and blockaded by the Saudi Arabia with US support. So the United States needs to have integrity and consistency in our foreign policy, whether it's Yemen or Ukraine. A human life has value. It doesn't matter where that human lives. We need to be protecting civilian lives. So we have to be looking at how can we protect the most number of civilians and bring this war to a rapid end. And I think that means looking for off-ramps, looking for opportunities for there to be negotiation. And so often the United States has had a policy of bomb first, talk later, and we need to change that.
You're seeing Russia and Putin specifically as someone that's capable of negotiation in a rational way. I mean, let's pretend it was Trump in Russia instead of Putin. I mean, there are people that are potentially not possible to debate with, or it could be with Saudi Arabia, capable of negotiating with religious extremists. I don't know. I mean, it gets very complicated. There's usually players who can discuss what's a win-win and what could work between our point of negotiation and yours. But I don't see that in Russia and you know Saudi Arabia's issue better than I do. But it just seems like those situations do come up, right? Or not. I mean, talk me out of that. But that's what I see.
There's more that can be done for de-escalation and diplomacy. I mean, otherwise, if we just have the cynicism that Putin is never going to negotiate, that he's never going to come to the table. I mean, we have to make the incentive strong enough. We have to make the case. We have to be able to show that there is something that the United States is willing to help offer for that to be appealing. But the United States has to engage here in a way that's different, and we have to find an off-ramp to save civilian lives, because the alternative is just escalation, continued escalation, and more lives lost. I don't think that's a workable option.
All right, Niki, since I added on to that question, you're welcome to add as well.
Well, I was just thinking, of programs like Radio Free Europe, where we disseminate information that's truthful to the Russian public who are just getting their news from the state TV stations. So that's, I think, another way that we can get our democratic values across.
Yep. Okay. A more local issue that just kind of came up, not to change the subject too dramatically, but it's pretty interesting and a little scary with yet another radical Supreme Court decision, or I thought. This was in terms of the Border Patrol having almost unlimited power within the 100 miles of the national border, which Burlington, as an example, is well within that 100-mile zone. And I'm wondering if either of you had a chance to read through that decision at all, or even a summation of it, and if you have any thoughts. And Niki, you first.
I have not had the opportunity yet. Did it come down this weekend? Because I was...
Yeah, it's within the last... What exact day, I don't recall.
All right. Well, I was working clinically, so that's...
You're excused. All right.
Yeah. But I will say that I think that part of the whole issue of inflation is that supply and demand are, demand is outweighing supply. And if we had a work program nationally similar to what we have in Vermont, we could increase supply by having more workers. Those people who want to come in, let's let them come in and work. It seems to me nuts not to. So
you're responding that the whole issue is related to employment, essentially employment activity, or right, illegal immigration related to employment. Gotcha.
Right. We all know that we need workers here. Everybody does. There are not. I mean, has anybody else tried to get a plumber lately? I mean, it's hard. And all the people, I see Vermonters every day as patients, and I hear their stories. And it is really tough for them to find enough employees. So
that's a good point. Yep. All right. Thanks for that, Isaac. Same. I don't know if you can follow that specific issue, but it seemed, and the point of it was that it's extra. What's the right term here? That you can't. Basically, there's no rights. If the Border Patrol comes to your wherever you happen to be, there's no warrants are not required, et cetera. So Isaac, any thoughts on that if you had a chance to see that?
Yeah, it's so important that we protect the civil rights of all people here, all people in the United States, including in the border region. And that Vermont is a border state. And it's concerning to me that if you happen to be in Burlington within 100 miles of the border, that you would be at risk of having your civil rights violated. I think that it goes back to that question of militarization of our society. You were talking about militarization of our police. We're talking about militarization around the world, but also in terms of immigration and customs enforcement. Now, I had the opportunity to do a border studies program for a semester in college, where I spent the fall semester living with a Mexican family, taking class in Mexico, taking classes in Texas, and I would walk across the border every day. That was at a different time, and I think it's more difficult to have that border crossing. I know that just crossing the Canadian border can become that can be a challenge, and I think we want to be able to have people feel safe. In terms of the question that you brought up, we want to have people, all Vermonters, all people in the state should be able to feel safe and not worry that they're going to get a knock in the middle of the night. I mean, that's so important to being able to enjoy being in this country, is to not have that, living in that sort of fear. And if you're an immigrant, I think that we need to have protection of our immigrants, so that we can have that society where people feel safe.
Because it does remind me of, what is it, Derby Line, where the national border goes right through the library. So if you're in the children's room, you're in the US, and the history shelves are in Canada, but that's pretty rare. Anyway, one of our committee brought up the questions about the issues about the First Amendment. I mean, we talked a bit about the Second Amendment and their efforts with the potential gun legislation. But of course, it's come up as a debate on the First Amendment, with people like Elon Musk saying, making the case of where Trump should not lose his access to Twitter and things like that. It's just, and I don't want you to talk about that, but in general, where it is a very complicated issue around the free speech, and where and how it gets drawn. So I'd be interested in any thoughts either of you have on that. And Isaac, goes to you first.
These are difficult questions, and sometimes can be difficult to weigh, right? We want the First Amendment. We also want to have protections particularly for minorities, and of various sort, racial minorities, sexual minorities. We want to have protection for people who have experienced oppression and discrimination in our society. So I think that's why it's important that we have courts that are, we have a judicial system that can weigh these questions. In terms of free speech, one of the things that I got to work on when I was a high school student, Brattleboro Union High School, was bring people together to stand up against the use of the Confederate flag to intimidate Black students in our school. And that was something we had. Students were walking down the hallways, and people would flash they'd have a Confederate flag t-shirt on, they'd flash their jacket open and call them the N-word. And that kind of bigotry has no place in our state. And I love that in this state, people stand up for one another, and that we have that sense of solidarity with our neighbors. And I think that's the kind of, regardless of what the courts say, regardless of what the law is, we as just everyday people in this state get to show up for one another and rally and say, no, you can't treat our neighbors like that. We are going to treat each other with respect.
So even if the First Amendment would protect someone being a racist and a bigot, would they still have that right to do that? And we're going to lean on neighbors and friends protecting us in that case, or do we say no? This is, because it seems like we've moved in the direction of that type of behavior is not allowed, and but where that line gets drawn is, I guess, where I'm heading. But
yeah, I don't think that hate speech is acceptable. No.
Yeah, well, no, me either, but I agree.
And I think that it's important for us to have laws that protect people and protect people who belong to minorities in our society. And it's also important for people and for our political leaders to be setting the culture. I mean, I think we saw a rise in hate crimes when President Trump was in the White House. And that's partly because of the rhetoric and the divisiveness that was coming out of his mouth. So that's why it's really important that whoever is elected to the United States Senate from Vermont, they have a duty, I think, that's beyond simply legislating. They also have a duty as a leader in our state and someone who is going to stand up for the people who have been disenfranchised, the people who have been terrorized, the people who have been pushed to the margins, and make sure that their voices are at the center and that they are never alone.
Thank you. And Niki, same question.
Yeah, so I think we have to draw the line at hate speech, but just because we have free speech does not allow people to yell fire in a crowded theater. We have to regulate speech, including the internet, when it comes to people who are lying. And when we all have a right to our own opinion and to express it, but we don't have a right to lie, mislead, or to encourage hate speech or hateful actions. That's unacceptable. And you have to draw the line there.
Okay. Well, it does point to the deepening, and of course, that whole 5-year, really, if you think of the campaign leading up to it, and then the year and a half since, so it makes it 6.5 years of widening partisan divide. And each of you have brought that up a bit already, but that seems to be an overriding issue right now in our time. And in fact, some have even, some on the right are absolutely freely discussing open civil war. And when you look at the videos from January 6th, that's one of the themes that goes there as well. So on one side, working to shrink the partisan divide, but then at the same time, what do we end up doing if it reaches that point of a true declared rejection of our rule of law and our democratic principles? So that's kind of two questions. So we'll start, Niki, we'll start. The first one is the more positive. How do we, if you could, what buttons and levers would you push to diminish the partisan divide?
Well, I'm really proud that my campaign has support from both Republicans and Democrats. And I think that Vermont really can lead the nation as an example of how we can get along despite political differences. And I have said many times that I pledge, if I am sent to DC, that I will work for all Vermonters, not just those who agree with me politically. We have to support those Republicans who have stood up to Trump and have stood up for the rule of law. I tweeted the other day that, wow, I never thought I would be thankful for Bill Barr and for Representative Cheney. But I am really thankful to those Republicans who have had the courage to stand up to the rest of the Republicans who have really failed our country.
All right, and we'll do the darker question after. So Isaac, let's stay on the more optimistic and more positive direction of diminishing that partisan divide. How would you tackle that?
We have to we have to find common ground with people. That's one of the things that I find most exciting, and one of the things I've enjoyed most in the coalition building work that I've done. I mean, I built this coalition. We had the AFL-CIO signing on to the letters that I was circulating for a global pandemic response and economic response to the pandemic. And we also had the Iowa Farmers Union and Catholic organizations and the Presbyterian Church of the United States. And seeing these groups come together was really exciting. And getting to work with Republican farmers in Iowa, in North Dakota, in conservatives in Oklahoma, and seeing that people, nobody wants to see people starving around the world. And we can find win-win solutions. And this particular thing around a global pandemic response, it turns out that a lot of American exporters were concerned about diminishing markets, as countries are going down the tubes in terms of their economies, that's not good for the US economy. And so by getting international resources released, it helped poor countries, it helped prevent starvation, but it also helped US export markets. And that's something that conservatives in the United States understand. So that gives me confidence. It's, sometimes when we lose confidence in the institutions and the entrenched systems that we have, we can still find confidence in one another. And I have a whole lot of confidence in Vermonters to elect somebody who's not entrenched in the system, like they've elected Bernie Sanders all these years, but also somebody who they understand is going to be able to bring people together. And I have confidence in the American people to move forward and to remember our common ground.
Well, Art, I promised you the darker side on the opposite end of that question is worst case scenario. Our efforts to bridge the partisan divide gets worse. Someone like, what's his name? Ron DeSantis, who can be every bit as nasty as Donald Trump, but younger and smarter. And the temperature starts to rise to the point not seen since the 1860s. What do you do? You're senator. What do you do? What's your, and this is a crazy question, so I apologize in advance. But what would you imagine having to address, or how would you respond in that situation? And again, apologies for a poor question, but.
No. It's hard to know exactly what I would do in that situation, that hypothetical. But I will say that that we need moral courage at this time, and we need results. I had a situation where, after Saudi Arabia murdered and dismembered the Washington Post journalist, they were doing a kind of a whitewashing tour of the United States to gain favor and to try to tell a different story about what had happened. And I snuck into a party. I got myself in to a private party where a Saudi prince was speaking on behalf of the kingdom. And when everybody came together in the living room, this home, I got the first question in, and I asked when was Saudi Arabia going to stop bombing their neighbor, Yemen? It took guts to do that. But to me, that's the sort of thing, it's like, you have to stand up. You have to, when there is violence, when there is hatred, and when there are real threats, we need people with courage who will stand up and ask those difficult questions and put ourselves on the line. That to me is a big part of what it means to lead. So I can't say exactly what I would do or what I would say or where I would go, but I do think that we need leadership of people who are going to be able to speak to the concerns of people across this country. And having grown up in a low-income family, being someone who, my husband and I have student debt right now, I get the frustration. I get the resentment. And I get the feeling of not being included. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's important to be bringing the voices of everyday Americans to the table and to actually addressing the needs, the pressing needs that so many Americans are facing today.
Thank you. Niki, same question.
So
stupid as it is, yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to hang out with you, Isaac, a little bit more and get into those parties.
Yeah.
They're crazy.
And what did they do to you at the party after you asked that question? We didn't hear the rest of the story, but I'm
here today.
Yeah, you're still alive. There you are.
And that's a pretty great story. Again, as it is a hypothetical and it's hard for me to say what I would do, but I think what we can do now is to prevent militarizing those folks with extreme views. A ban on assault rifles, which is not part of the proposed legislation, I think goes a long way. You know, listening to these hearings, I realize how close we really came to total disaster. I mean,
Yeah.
Trump would have declared martial law, and that would have been it.
Yep.
If they had gotten to Pence or the speaker. So I think as a physician, I know prevention is the best medicine. And I would do what I can to prevent that from ever coming to fruition.
Great. I actually just have one more question, and then you can do a closing as well. And I guess we'll start with you, Niki. It's actually a two-part question. Who would you support for President of the United States in 2024 if Biden is running, or in the second part of that, if Biden is not running? And if you're not sure who that would be, then you just can say that. But I'm asking that as to who would be, if let's do it one at a time. Joe Biden is running again are you going to be comfortable supporting Joe Biden in 2024?
I would be comfortable.
Okay.
I know that his popularity is not where I think it should be. But of course I would support him. I am hoping that he will decide not to run, and Vice President Harris will be our nominee.
Great. Okay, that's good to hear. And Isaac, if I can ask you the same question.
Mm-hmm. We're facing an increasingly violent and divisive country, I mean, and leadership on the right. We need to elect the best person to stand up and lead. I don't know who that is. I think we'll have a clearer picture of that closer to the election. But I trust that Democratic voters will make the best choice when we have options. You know, it's well documented that in 2016, the establishment put their finger on the scale. If it had been an open and fair primary, Bernie Sanders would be facing his second term.
No, don't go there. Don't go there, Isaac. That's not true. But I can accept that you think that, but don't state it as a fact, because that's not a fact. As a Democrat, that is not a fact. So I challenge you on the answer.
Fair enough.
And I shouldn't do that either. But you can have that opinion, but that's not a fact.
Fair enough. That is certainly my opinion. I'll own that.
All right. And you're welcome to that.
Sounds good.
Anyone that if it wasn't Joe Biden, and that's, I mean, as Niki said, Vice President Harris, is there someone that you would lean towards at this point in time?
No, I'm waiting to see what.
Way too early. Yeah, it's hard. And another dumb question, so I apologize for that. So you're each going to get a last 2 minutes, and you can even go over a little bit, but kind of sum up anything that popped into your mind not off of any of my questions, but just kind of summarize and ask us to vote for you and why. And so Isaac, you're up first.
Great. Well, thank you again for hosting this, for making the time and the energy to bring us together. I'm an organizer who brings fresh energy, who will challenge the status quo that's not working for most people in this country. We all share certain democratic values. We know that these values are under threat. I hope that this evening that you've seen that I'm the best choice in this moment of crisis. We need a new voice and new leadership to confront the challenges that together we face. The topics that we've discussed affect me and the next generation, and all of us in a profound way. But we're going to have to live with the future that we shape together. We've talked about how democracy is in crisis. And for democracy to be stable, we need to bring in more voices. We need to make sure that government is listening to Vermonters, not to corporate lobbyists. And we need to restore the faith and confidence of the American public in our government. It's not a secret that I like Congressman Welch, but one place where we differ is our practices around campaign finance and spending. Peter right now is being, spending corporate PAC money that he's pledged to reject. After 15 years of taking that corporate PAC money, the last few months he's pledged to, he's stopped taking that, but he's spending it. He's been investigated in the national media for his ties to the pharmaceutical industry, for violating stock trade laws. I won't trade individual stocks, in part because I don't have any, but also because I think it's critical that we give confidence to voters and confidence to the American public, and not give any perception that we are taking actions and using our insider knowledge to profit personally. I've put myself on the line for my community with courage, even when it's hard. And right now, my campaign is urging Congressman Welch to agree to a debate that's hosted by the Brattleboro Reformer, Bennington Banner, and Manchester Journal. I would urge people watching to join me in calling on the congressman to support that and for his participation. I appreciate that Dr. Niki here has agreed to that debate. I think that democracy requires these sort of forums like you generously and graciously are providing this evening for all of us to come together and to listen to the candidates. And I want to make sure that everybody has that opportunity. That's what this campaign is all about. It's about what American democracy and Vermont, I think, are all about, is bringing people to the table, letting everybody have the information they need to make the best choice that they can. And I hope this evening that I've earned your support, and I look forward to meeting you in the days to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. Appreciate it. And Niki, you have the last word. I think you had the first question, so you got to answer the last one. So go for it.
Well, first of all, thank you to the Windsor Democrats and to Al and Dottie. It's great to be back here. I decided to run for office because I feel I can help more Vermonters in DC than I can one at a time in the ER. I was hoping when I decided to run that I would be elected based on my policies, my intelligence, my hard working, because I work hard. But unfortunately, I have found that it's almost impossible to win statewide office unless you are a millionaire and a multimillionaire, in fact. And I would love to be able to address campaign finance as part of my campaign, because I'd like to see people like myself and like Isaac have a fair shot at winning a statewide election. In the ER, we will treat anybody who walks in the door. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you have 3 homes or you're unhoused, we will treat you. And I pledge, if you send me to DC to be the first female senator from the great state of Vermont, I will help all Vermonters, not just those with whom I agree politically. Thank you.
Thank you, Niki, and thank you both, and thank you, our audience this evening. A reminder that the Act Blue link is below the screen, and we'd love to have you donate. But thanks for being here and watching, and let your friends know our other discussions are online at our YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen them all, please catch up. Thank you and have a great evening. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you both. Good
Thank you,
night.
Dottie and Al.
Okay, we're offline, so